You wake in a small, windowless chamber, the air thick with the sour tang of sweat, fear, and olive oil scent that clings to the stone walls like a second skin. The cold bites at your bare flesh. Rough-hewn granite pressing against your back. Each jagged edge a reminder of your place in this world. In the distance, laughter echoes from the main house. Not the warm kind that once filled your village during harvest festivals, but a jagged, predatory sound that twists your stomach into knots. Your body aches, a map of bruises blooming purple and yellow across your ribs. Each mark a grotesque flower born of last night's torments. The iron shackle round your ankle has rubbed your skin raw, crusted blood flaking off with every cautious movement, a constant reminder of your captivity. You're 15. Though birthdays stopped mattering when they tore you from your family's hearth, time bends. Strangely when your property, each day bleeding into the next, marked only by pain and survival. Footsteps approach, heavy sandals slapping against polished marble, a sound you've learned to dread. It's the overseer, his presence as certain as the dawn, come to drag you into another day of what they call service. Your hands tremble as you reach for the thin tunic crumpled in the corner, its threadbare fabric offering little protection against the chill or the eyes that will soon appraise you. The door scrapes open, metal grinding against stone, and a shaft of harsh sunlight pierces the gloom. You squint, raising a trembling hand to shield your eyes. But the overseer's silhouette fills the doorway, a towering figure of muscle and scars. His face a weathered map of cruelty carved by years of breaking young spirits. Clean yourself, he growls, tossing a damp, mildewed cloth at your feet. The master has guests tonight, important ones. His eyes rake over you, cold and calculating. Like a merchant inspecting livestock. You're going to help entertain them. Your throat tightens. You know what that means, have known since the first night they dragged you, kicking and screaming, from your village. When they told you your family estates were paid in the only currency they had left, you. This was the reality for countless young men in ancient Greece. A truth buried beneath the polished marble of philosophy and democracy. Beyond the celebrated symposiums and grand orations lay a system that devoured the vulnerable, stripping their humanity like bark from a felled tree. The chamber you wake in is no anomaly. It's a standard feature of wealthy Athenian households, designed to house slaves in conditions that break the body and spirit. These cells, often carved into basements or tucked behind opulent villas, were deliberately small, windowless to prevent escape, and soundproofed to muffle cries that might disturb the household's refined sensibilities. The olive oil you smell isn't tea just from lamps or cooking it is used to anoint slaves' bodies before they were presented to guests, a grotesque ritual to make suffering gleam under torchlight. This is not the Greece of school books, where heroes debate justice and sculptors carve gods. This is the Greece of shadows, where beauty was a commodity, and youth a currency spent without mercy. If you're moved by these hidden truths, by the stories of those erased from history's gilded pages, consider hitting that like button and subscribing for more, and please, leave a comment below, tell me where you're listening from. It's humbling to know we're connected. Across oceans and centuries, bound by a shared hunger to uncover the past's unspoken pain. In this world, your story began long before you understood its weight, before you knew that beauty could be a curse, or that survival would demand a price no child could ever imagine paying. Picture a small farming community nestled in a valley between ancient olive groves, their silver-green leaves whispering secrets to the wind. The houses are simple constructs of mud, brick, and thatch, with dirt floors that turn to mud in the rains and dust in the dry spells. Entire families huddle in single rooms for warmth during chilly nights, the air filled with the earthy scent of hearth fires and shared dreams. Children run naked between the houses, their laughter mingling with the bleating of goats and the rhythmic grind of women milling grain. At stone querns, a sound as eternal as the hills themselves. It's a harsh life, etched by the sun and sculpted by scarcity, but it's life nonetheless rooted in the soil, bound by blood and tradition. Then comes the drought, a merciless thief that steals the color from the world, week after week. The sun beats down like a vengeful god, scorching the earth until withered crops crack underfoot. The olive trees, gnarled sentinels that have stood for generations, yield only shriveled fruit, their branches drooping in defeat. Barley fields, once golden waves in the breeze, turn brown and brittle, crumbling to dust at the slightest touch. Wells that have quenched the villagers' thirst since the time of your great-grandfathers run dry, their depths echoing with hollow despair. Families, already teetering on the brink, begin to make choices no parent should ever face. First, they sell their livestock, the goats and sheep that embody their meager wealth. Each animal a lifeline traded for a handful of grain. Then comes the jewelry, those few precious heirlooms passed down through bloodlines, glinting tokens of better days now pawned for survival. When those are gone, the parents start looking at their children with different eyes clouded by hunger and heartbreak. This wasn't uncommon in ancient Greece. Historical accounts from regions like Attica and Boeotia describe recurring famines, such as the one in the 4th century BCE that ravaged the Peloponnese, forcing families into debt bondage or outright sales. The anguish of a mother watching her child's fate unfold was a silent epidemic, echoed in fragments of poetry and legal texts that hint at the emotional toll. Where parents grappled with the gods' indifference and society's harsh laws, the slave merchants arrive like vultures sensing carrion, drawn by whispers of desperation carried on the parched wind. They set up in the village center, their chains and ropes coiled like metal serpents ready to strike, their ledgers brimming with names, prices, and cold calculations. They offer immediate payment for long-term contracts, 20 years of service in exchange for enough silver to keep a family fed through the bitter winter. It sounds reasonable, even generous, when your children's ribs are showing and their cries echo through empty nights. But you're 12 years old. You don't grasp the mathematics of desperation, the cruel algebra where one life equals temporary salvation for many. You only know that your father won't meet your eyes as he negotiates your price, his voice a hoarse whisper bargaining away your future. Your mother turns away when the merchant examines your teeth like you're a horse at market, his calloused fingers prying open your mouth with impersonal efficiency. You feel those rough hands checking your muscles, evaluating your potential for labor or worse. While words like promising, good breeding, and suitable for household service hang in the air, their sinister implications lost on your innocent ears not yet. The merchant counts out silver coins into your father's palm, the metal catching the sunlight in cruel flashes, each piece a symbol of a year stolen from your life. Your father's hands shake as he accepts the payment, but he takes it nonetheless, his shoulders slumping under the weight of necessity. Your mother covers her face and weeps, her sobs muffled by calloused hands that once cradled you. But she doesn't stop the transaction, how could she? When the alternative is watching her other children starve, they tell you it's temporary, that you'll earn money and return home a man, wealthy enough to buy your own land, perhaps even take a wife. They promise you'll be treated well, learn valuable skills, that this is an opportunity for advancement in a world that chews up the poor. The lies fall from their lips like honey from a broken comb, sweet, but poisonous, dripping with the false hope that masks the abyss ahead. In that moment, as the coins clink and your world fractures, the parental anguish burns deepest. A father's pride shattered, a mother's heart torn, all in the name of survival in a land where the gods seemed to have turned their backs. Picture a small farming community nestled in a valley between ancient olive groves, their silver-green leaves whispering secrets to the wind. The houses are simple constructs of mud brick and thatch, with dirt floors that turn to mud in the rains and dust in the dry spells. Entire families huddle in single rooms for warmth during chilly nights, the air filled with the earthy scent of hearth fires and shared dreams. Children run naked between the houses, their laughter mingling with the bleating of goats and the rhythmic grind of women milling grain. At Stone Querns, a sound as eternal as the hills themselves. It's a harsh life, etched by the sun and sculpted by scarcity, but it's life nonetheless rooted in the soil, bound by blood and tradition. Then comes the drought, a merciless thief that steals the color from the world, week after week. The sun beats down like a vengeful god, scorching the earth until withered crops crack underfoot. The olive trees, gnarled sentinels that have stood for generations, yield only shriveled fruit, their branches drooping in defeat. Barley fields, once golden waves in the breeze, turn brown and brittle, crumbling to dust at the slightest touch. Wells that have quenched the villagers' thirst since the time of your great-grandfathers run dry, their depths echoing with hollow despair. Families, already teetering on the brink, begin to make choices no parent should ever face. First, they sell their livestock, the goats and sheep that embody their meager wealth. Each animal a lifeline traded for a handful of grain. Then comes the jewelry, those few precious heirlooms passed down through bloodlines, glinting tokens of better days now pawned for survival. When those are gone, the parents start looking at their children with different eyes clouded by hunger and heartbreak. This wasn't uncommon in ancient Greece. Historical accounts from regions like Attica and Boeotia describe recurring famines, such as the one in the 4th century BCE that ravaged the Peloponnese, forcing families into debt bondage or outright sales. The anguish of a mother watching her child's fate unfold was a silent epidemic, echoed in fragments of poetry and legal texts that hint at the emotional toll. Where parents grappled with the gods' indifference and society's harsh laws, the slave merchants arrive like vultures sensing carrion, drawn by whispers of desperation carried on the parched wind. They set up in the village center, their chains and ropes coiled like metal serpents ready to strike, their ledgers brimming with names, prices, and cold calculations. They offer immediate payment for long-term contracts, 20 years of service in exchange for enough silver to keep a family fed through the bitter winter. It sounds reasonable, even generous, when your children's ribs are showing and their cries echo through empty nights. But you're 12 years old. You don't grasp the mathematics of desperation, the cruel algebra where one life equals temporary salvation for many. You only know that your father won't meet your eyes as he negotiates your price, his voice a hoarse whisper bargaining away your future. Your mother turns away when the merchant examines your teeth like you're a horse at market, his calloused fingers prying open your mouth with impersonal efficiency. You feel those rough hands checking your muscles, evaluating your potential for labor or worse. While words like promising, good breeding, and suitable for household service hang in the air, their sinister implications lost on your innocent ears not yet. The merchant counts out silver coins into your father's palm, the metal catching the sunlight in cruel flashes, each piece a symbol of a year stolen from your life. Your father's hands shake as he accepts the payment, but he takes it nonetheless, his shoulders slumping under the weight of necessity. Your mother covers her face and weeps, her sobs muffled by calloused hands that once cradled you. But she doesn't stop the transaction, how could she? When the alternative is watching her other children starve, they tell you it's temporary, that you'll earn money and return home a man, wealthy enough to buy your own land, perhaps even take a wife. They promise you'll be treated well, learn valuable skills, that this is an opportunity for advancement in a world that chews up the poor. The lies fall from their lips like honey from a broken comb sweet, but poisonous, dripping with the false hope that masks the abyss ahead. In that moment, as the coins clink and your world fractures, the parental anguish burns deepest. A father's pride shattered, a mother's heart torn, all in the name of survival in a land where the gods seemed to have turned their backs. The merchants who arrive in your village are seasoned predators in a trade as old as the hills surrounding you, their wagons creaking under the weight of iron and despair. They come from the bustling ports of Corinth or Athens, traversing well-worn slave trade routes that crisscross the ancient Greek world like veins pumping. The lifeblood of empire. In the classical period, these routes were lifelines of commerce and cruelty, stretching from the northern frontiers of Thrace and Scythia, where war captives were harvested like ripe grain, to the eastern shores of Asia Minor, where raids and tribal conflicts supplied endless streams of human cargo. Historical accounts such as those in Herodotus' writings paint a picture of a complex mesh of overland paths through mountain passes and coastal sea lanes plied by specialized merchant ships, some as large as 350 to 500 tons, designed to haul not just olive oil and wine grease as prized exports, but chains full of the defeated and the desperate, piracy often intertwined with legitimate trade, with seafaring bandits capturing vessels or raiding coastal villages to feed the insatiable. Markets in cities like Athens, where the demand for labor in agriculture, mines, and households never waned. These merchants aren't lone opportunists. They're part of an organized network, their practices honed over generations into a brutal efficiency. They travel in caravans for protection, armed with guards against bandits, and carry ledgers meticulously recording transactions, names reduced to descriptions, ages estimated, origins noted for their exotic appeal to buyers seeking barbarian stock. In the classical era, as detailed in economic history, slaves were often sourced from internecine wars among Greek city-states or barbarian tribes, sold by victors to itinerant traders, who transported them via the Diolkos hallway across the Isthmus of Corinth, a woodman railway of sorts that allowed ships to be dragged overland bypassing treacherous seas, or they marched them along dusty roads from the interior, like the pots from Thessaly or Macedonia, where debt-ridden families like yours were easy prey. The merchants knew the value of presentation. Healthy, unscarred bodies fetched higher prices, so they avoided excessive brutality en route, saving that for the overseers. But their examinations were invasive, clinical assessments that stripped away dignity before the chains ever touched skin. In your village square, under the relentless sun that has already stolen so much, the merchants unfold their grim enterprise with practiced ease. Their chains and ropes lie coiled like serpents in the dust, glinting ominously as villagers gather, drawn by rumor and necessity. The ledgers, bound in worn leather, are propped on makeshift tables, pages filled with columns of figures, prices negotiated in drachmae, terms that mask lifetime servitude as contracts of 20 years or more. It sounds almost merciful when framed against the backdrop of starvation. Silver now for service later, enough to buy seed for next season's planting or grain from distant Sicily, one of Greece's key import sources. But mercy is a stranger here. These men profit from misery, their roots sustained by the very wars and famines that plague the land. A bad harvest in Attica might send them north to Thrace, where Thracian tribes sold their captives cheaply, or east to Phrygia, where Persian conflicts spilled over into Greek markets. Piracy added to the supply, with corsairs operating in the Aegean, capturing free Greeks and foreigners alike, funneling them into ports like Piraeus for resale. You're 12, too young to fathom the web of trade that ensnares you, understanding only the immediate horrors. Your father leads you forward. He won't meet your eyes, his gaze fixed on the parched ground, as he begins the negotiation. The merchant, a weathered man with sun-leathered skin and a beard streaked with grey, eyes you appraisingly, his accent hinting at miles travelled from the Black Sea coasts, perhaps, where Scythian slaves were prized for their strength. He circles you slowly, a predator assessing prey, his hands rough from handling countless bodies. First, he pries open your mouth to inspect your teeth, checking for rot or weakness that might lower your value. Healthy dentition means a boy who can eat hard bread and endure. Then, his fingers probe your arms and legs, squeezing muscles toned from village chores, evaluating not just for field work, but for the household service that commands premium prices in urban scent. Rupees, promising, he mutters, good breeding, suitable for finer duties. These code words, common in the trade, signal to savvy buyers, not a brute for the mines, but a youth with potential for domestic roles or worse, the intimate entertainments of wealthy households. Your mother stands aside, her face averted, tears carving tracks through the dust on her cheeks as the examination continues. The merchant tests your back for straightness, your eyes for clarity, even your voice by commanding you to speak, listening for accents that might appeal to buyers seeking exoticism. In the classical period, such inspections were standard, as traders maximized profits by categorizing slaves, strong ones for agriculture, skilled for crafts, beautiful for a personal service. Roots from barbarian lands brought tattooed Thracians or fair-haired Celts, but local Greeks like you fallen into debt were common to Solon's reforms in Athens had banned debt slavery for citizens, but in rural areas and other states the practice lingered blood into outright sale, your family's debt. Perhaps to a local landowner tied to Athenian elites. Makes you fair game. The haggling intensifies. Your father bartering desperately for a higher price, each extra coin a salve for his conscience. The merchant counters, low-citing the drought stole on your slight frame, but his eyes betray interest. Beauty like yours is a commodity fetched from roots where youth was plentiful. Like the slave markets of Chios or Ephesus, major hubs in the Aegean trade network. Finally, agreement. Silver coins are counted into your father's trembling palm, each one clinking like a nail in your coffin, representing years of your life traded away. The metal gleams in the sunlight, sourced perhaps from Laurian mines worked by other slaves, closing the circle of exploitation. As the transaction seals, your parents cling to you one last time, their words a cascade of deceptions born from love and guilt. It's temporary, your father whispers, his voice cracking. You'll come back a man, with silver of your own. Your mother adds, they'll treat you well, teach you trades, maybe even reading. Like the city folk, promises of land, a wife, advancement spill forth, sweet illusions to ease the parting. But you sense the poison beneath, the honeyed lies that coat the truth. This is no opportunity, but a descent into shadows. The merchant, impatient now, nods to his assistants, who step forward with chains. Your ankle is shackled, the cold iron biting into skin, marking the end of freedom. As they lead you away, the village fades behind, your cries swallowed by the wind. These merchants, masters of their grim craft, load you into the caravan, another entry in their ledger bound for the roads that lead to Athens over hills dotted with olive groves along coastal pots, where the sea whispers of distant horrors part of the eternal flow of human misery that built the glory of Greece. The journey to the city unfolds like a nightmare from which there's no waking, each step a chain link deeper into oblivion. You're part of a human caravan now, a wretched procession of dozens of boys and young men, linked together by iron collars and despair, shuffling along dusty paths that wind through the heart of ancient Greece. The chains clank rhythmically, a dirge that drowns out bird song and the whisper of wind through leaves, binding you to the boy in front and the one behind in a shared fate of misery. Your feet blister on the hot stones, the iron round your neck chafing skin already raw from the village farewell. But complaints and only the overseer's whips leather thongs that crack like thunder, leaving welts that burn under the relentless sun. This is no leisurely travel. It's a forced march, designed to break spirits before the market even begins, a common tactic in the slave trade of classical Greece, where transport was as much about conditioning as conveyance. The landscapes you pass would be breathtaking under different circumstances, a tapestry of the Greek world's diverse geography that slaves like you traversed unwillingly. You start in the rural hinterlands, perhaps the fertile valleys of Boeotia or the rocky slopes of Arcadia, where olive groves stretch like silver seas under the azure sky. Their ancient trees witnesses to countless such caravans. Historical records, including those from Xenophon's accounts of marches and Plato's casual mentions of slave acquisitions, reveal how these routes followed established paths from inland villages southward along the Cephissus River Valley toward Athens, or eastward through mountain passes like those in the Pindus Range, where eagles soar overhead on thermal currents, indifferent to the human suffering below. The terrain shifts as you move. Rolling hills carpeted in wildflowers give way to coastal roads where the Aegean Sea sparkles like scattered diamonds, its salt-tinged breeze a cruel tease of freedom. You glimpse fishing villages huddled against cliffs, their whitewashed homes gleaming in the distance, but your world has shrunk to the length of chain between you and the next boy, to the plodding rhythm of feet on stone, to the growing certainty that home is a dream fading with each mile. Slave transport in ancient Greece was a grueling ordeal, often overland to avoid the risks of sea voyages, though some caravans connected with ports like those in Corinth for shorter hauls. Merchants preferred foot marches for control, chaining slaves in lines of 10 to 20 to prevent escape, with armed guards often freed slaves themselves flanking the group. The pace was brutal, up to 20 miles a day, dawn to dusk, with minimal water from streams or skins, rationed to keep you alive but weakened. Blistered feet were common, treated only if they threatened value. Otherwise, you hobbled on, the pain of forgery shaping innocence into endurance. The older ones in the caravan don't talk much. They've learned that hope is just another word for a future disappointment, their silence a shield against the overseer's ears. The younger ones cry for their mothers until their voices give out, or until a guard's boot or fist silences them, teaching the first lesson of submission. You march through regions rich in history yet blind to your plight, past the sacred groves of Delphi where oracles spoke of fates but ignored yours, along the Isthmus of Corinth, a bottleneck of trade where slaves were as common cargo as amphorae of wine. At night, the caravan halts in makeshift camps, often in clearings off the main roads to avoid prying eyes or rescuers. They chain you to stakes driven deep into the ground, iron links securing ankles or wrists, forcing you to lie on your side in the dirt, the earth cold and unyielding beneath a threadbare sky. The stars wheel overhead, the same constellations your father once named during village nights, Orion the Hunter, marking your captivity, but now they seem distant judges. Unmoved by muffled sobs rippling through the line, sleep comes fitfully, haunted by the day's aches and tomorrow's unknowns, while guards patrol with torches, their flames casting grotesque shadows that dance like demons. Sometimes the merchants bring visitors to inspect their merchandise, men with soft hands and calculating eyes, traveling the same routes, who welcome on you like farmers at a livestock fair. They prod and poke, checking for disease or injury, evaluating your potential for various forms of service. Fingers trace scars, test limbs for strength, appraise faces for beauty, or while you lie chained, exposed and humiliated. You learn quickly to recognize the different types of buyers, their preferences as varied as the Greek city-states themselves. The agricultural slave owners, often from large estates in the core around Athens or Sparta, look for muscle and endurance boys who can toil in fields from dawn to dusk. Harvesting wheat or pressing olives under the sun's hammer, they squeeze biceps, check backs for resilience, envisioning you bent over furrows in the fertile plains of Messenia or the vineyards of Nemea. The household masters seek something subtler. Compliance, intelligence, is certain fragility that suggests you won't cause trouble. They might ask you to stand, to speak, assessing if you're fit for serving in urban villas, pouring wine or tending hearts. But there's a third category, and you learn to dread their visits most of all. These men dress in fine chittums of linen or silk, speak with cultured accents honed in the academies of Athens, and smell of expensive perfumes from the East or rose all from Rhodes. Their fingers glitter with rings of gold and electrum, sourced from distant mines, and when they examine you, their touch lingers in ways that make your skin crawl, tracing curves and contours with predatory intent. They're looking for a specific alchemy, youth blended with beauty, unscarred skin that promises pleasure over labor. These buyers hail from the elite circles of city-states, where symposiums demanded not just intellectual stimulation, but physical indulgence. Historical insights from Aristophanes' plays and legal orations by Lysias hint at this dark underbelly that trade in pretty boys for personal use. Often from regions like Thrace or your own rural Greece, transported via these very routes. A touch on the thigh, a murmur about potential for entertainment, and you shrink inside, sensing a fate worse than fields or kitchens. One such man might pause by you, his eyes narrowing appreciatively, commenting on your delicate features that would fetch well in Athens markets. The merchant nods knowingly, noting interest for later bidding. While you lie there, chain-bound under the stars, the coastal wind carrying the seas marking freedom. The journey drags on, days blurring into a haze of dust and dread, through mountain passes where the air thins and eagles circle like omens. You cross rivers on rickety ferries, the water below a temptation to jump, but chains and gods make suicide a fantasy. The geography shapes your suffering, steep ascents in the Parnassus Mountains leave lungs burning, while descents jar blistered feet occasionally. The caravan passes temples' grand structures to Athena or Apollo where free men offer prayers, oblivious to the chained procession skirting the sacred grounds. By the time the spires of Athens appear on the horizon, smoky and distant, you've shed more than miles. You've lost the boy who laughed in olive groves, replaced by a hollow vessel braced for the market's more. The nightmare journey, etched in historical annals as routine commerce, has prepared you not just for sale, but for a life where beauty is a curse and survival a daily negotiation with despair. The caravan's relentless march brings not just physical torment, but a parade of intruders who shatter the fragile illusion of isolation. Each visitor a harbinger of the fates awaiting you at journey's end. As nights descend and the group huddles in makeshift camps clearings carved from olive-dotted hills or sheltered coves along the Aegean coast, the merchants summon potential buyers. Like moths to a flame drawn by word of fresh stock traversing the trade routes. These inspections are no mere formalities, they're previews of the slave economy's layered hierarchies, where human worth is passed by class, need, and desire in ancient Greece. Slavery wasn't monolithic, but stratified, reflecting the society as rigid social classes, from the aristocratic elite who owned vast estates, to middling farmers scraping by, each seeking bodies to fuel their ambitions or indulgences. Historical texts, such as Aristotle's Politics, rationalize the system, arguing that some souls are naturally servile. justifying the preferences that buyers display under the flickering torchlight, the agricultural. Buyers arrive first. Often local landowners from the regions you pass fertile plains of Thessaly or the vineyards of. The Peloponnese men with weathered faces and calloused hands, their tunics stained with soil. They embody the backbone of Greek economy, where slaves comprised up to a third of the population in states like Athens, toiling in fields to produce the olive oil, wine, and grain that underpinned trade and wealth. These men seek entrance above all, broad shoulders for ploughing, sturdy legs for harvesting under the scorching sun. One such buyer, a burly farmer from nearby fields, might circle the chained line, his boots kicking up dust as he prods your calves with a stick, testing for resilience. This one could handle the yoke. He grunts, envisioning you bent over froze from dawn to dusk, part of the chattel that allowed free citizens leisure for politics and philosophy. His class, the hoplite farmers who formed the military corps, relied on slaves to maintain productivity during wars, a preference rooted in necessity rather than luxury. But you, with your slight build and unscarred skin, draw only a dismissive shake of his head to delicate for the back-breaking labor that claimed many lives in sun-baked estates. Next come the household masters, a step up the social ladder, urban artisans or minor officials from towns along the route, like Thebes or Corinth, where domestic slavery was essential for maintaining households. These buyers represent the middle strata, free but not elite, needing compliant help for daily drudgery cooking, cleaning, child-rearing. They look for intelligence in your eyes, a spark suggesting quick learning without rebellion, and a fragility that promises obedience. Social preferences here lean toward educated slaves for tutoring or managing accounts, but for boys like you, it often meant indoor service, away from public eyes. A thin man with ink-stained fingers, perhaps a scribe, might kneel beside you, forcing your chin up to meet his gaze. Can you count? Speak Greek clearly, he demands, assessing if you're fit for a villa's inner workings. In classical Greece, as detailed in Demosthenes' orations, household slaves formed intimate parts of family life, their preferences influenced by the oikos household economy, where loyalty was prized over brute strength. Yet your beauty elicits a different calculation. He pauses, fingers tracing your jaw, but ultimately pauses, seeking utility over allure. But it's the third category that sends chills deeper than the night air, buyers whose interest twists your gut with unspoken dread. These are the elite, aristocrats or wealthy merchants from Athens or beyond, traveling the same roads on business or pleasure, their fine clothing a stark contrast to your ex. They arrive in small entourages, horses tethered nearby, exuding the confidence of the upper echelons men who debated in the assembly, funded temples, or traded across the Mediterranean. In Greek society, class dictated not just wealth, but moral exemptions. The elite, comprising perhaps 5 to 10% of the population, viewed slaves as extensions of their status. With preferences for luxury items including human ones, they smell of expensive perfumes, imported from Egypt or Phoenicia via trade routes that parallel your own miserable path, masking the sweat of power with notes of cinnamon and frankincense. Their hands are soft, unmarred by labor, adorned with rings of gold mined by other slaves in places like Lorien, where thousands perished in darkness. When they examine you, it is with a lingering touch that has nothing to do with work and everything to do with possession. One such man, cloaked in a Hermatian of Tyrian purple dye worth its weight in silver, symbolizing his status, steps into the torchlight, his cultured accent rolling like polished marble as he addresses the merchant. "Show me the finer ones," he commands, eyes scanning the line with predatory precision. He stops before you, his fingers cold despite the warmth lifting your tunic to appraise your form. tracing lines that make bile rise in your throat. Youth and beauty, he murmurs approvingly. A rare combination, perfect for entertainment. This preference wasn't anomalous. Ancient sources like Plato's Symposium allude to the pederastic customs among the elite, where beautiful boys were courted or owned. Their youth a status symbol in symposiums blending intellect with eros. Socially, it was normalized among the upper classes, seen as educational or aesthetic, though for slaves, consent was relevant. Aristotle's hierarchies placed such boys in a category of natural inferiors, justifying exploitation as part of the good life. Your skin crawls as his touch lingers, fingers gliding over shoulders, down your back, assessing not muscle for a toil but contours for pleasure. He discusses you openly. As if you're deaf, this one's features almost godlike. Like Ganymede snatched by Zeus, he'd grace any banquet, the myth, central to Greek culture. Romanticized such dynamics, but for you, it's a veil over horror. Other elites nod, their preferences aligned. One might pinch your cheek, commenting on softness that invites, while another tests your hair's texture, envisioning it oiled for display. These men, from the Eupatrid families or nouveau rich traders, dominated the slave markets. Their wealth from colonies or wars funding indulgences that lower classes couldn't afford. Historical analyses reveal how class intersected with gender norms. Elite men mentored free youths but owned slaves for baser urges, a double standard embedded in law and custom. The merchant haggles lightly, teasing higher bids for Athens, but the buyer departs with a promise to seek you at market, his parting glance a chain heavier than iron. As the visitors fade into night, you're left staked to the ground, the encounters etching fear deeper. The older slaves whisper warnings. Those ones are the worst fields break your body, but they break your soul. Their words echo the social reality. Agricultural slaves might demand a mission through hard work, household ones through loyalty. But those chosen for beauty faced an intimacy that devoured identity. In the dark, listening to sobs, you grasp the class's cruel spectrum: labor for the poor, service for the middling. Pleasure for the rich, all feeding a system where your value is measured in silver and suffering. The journey resumes at dawn, but the buyer's shadows linger, a foretaste of Athens more. You march on, through landscapes indifferent to class or cruelty, the seas sparkle marking your chains. Each step carries the weight of preferences, muscle for fields, compliance for homes, beauty for beds. In this stratified world, your fate teeters on the elite's gaze, a social analysis written flesh greases glory built on gradients of exploitation, where the powerful's desires dictate the powerless doom. The slave market in Athens assaults every sense the moment the caravan crests the final hill, the city sprawl unfolding like a wound in the landscape. The sound hits you first, a cacophony of hundreds of voices haggling, crying, pleading, and commanding, blending into a roar that drowns out the distant crash of waves from Piraeus harbor. This is the Agora, the heart of Athenian commerce, where democracy is cradle-doubled as a stage for a human trafficking in classical times. As described by historians like Xenophon in his Ways and Means, the Athenian Agora was a bustling square ringed by stores and temples, where slaves were auctioned alongside spices from the east and pottery from Corinth. The slave section, often near the tholos or public buildings, handled thousands annually war captives from conflicts like the Peloponnesian War, debtors from across Greece. Even pirates' halls fueling an economy where 1 in 3 residents was enslaved. Auctions were public spectacles, regulated by poleti auctioneers who ensured taxes were paid, with prices ranging from 50 to 1,000 drachmae depending on skills or beauty. The smell comes next. A choking miasma of unwashed bodies, fierce sweat, urine. and something else you can't identify, but that turns your stomach a metallic tang of despair, mixed with the acrid smoke from nearby forges. This olfactory assault wasn't exaggerated. Archaeological digs at the Agora reveal latrines and waste pits nearby, while ancient texts like Aristophanes' comedies mock the market stench, a byproduct of cramming hundreds into pens under the Mediterranean sun. Then you see it, and the warnings from older slaves make terrible sense. Naked bodies ranged in rows like merchandise on platforms of wood and stone, elevated for buyer's scrutiny. Children barely old enough to walk stand beside their mothers, eyes wide with confusion, clutching at skirts that offer no protection. Old men with broken spirits and bent backs huddle nearby, their value measured in whatever fading strength remains, destined perhaps for the silver mines of Lorien, where life expectancy was measured in months everywhere. The buyers circle like sharks in charmed waters, pointing and discussing prices as if the people on the platforms can't hear every demeaning word. These are citizens of the world's first democracy, merchants in practical tunics, philosophers in flowing himmarsha, politicians with entourages exercising their right to own others. The auction process was formalized, sleeves registered upon arrival, inspected by officials to prevent fraud like hidden illnesses, then grouped by type skilled craftsmen separate from laborers. Domestics from field hands, you're herded into a holding area. The chains finally unlocked but replaced by guards' watchful eyes. As the merchant prepares his lot for sale, first comes the cleaning. Not out of kindness, but cold calculation. Clean merchandise fetches higher prices, a fact echoed in legal papyri detailing slave warranties against defects. Rough hands strip you bare, dousing you in buckets of tepid water drawn from the Agora's fountains, scrubbing with coarse sponges that scrape away dirt from the journey, but can't touch the deeper stains. Then the olive oil, greases liquid gold, slathered on to make your skin gleam in the sunlight, highlighting the lean muscles hardened by weeks of marching. This ritual, common in markets across the Mediterranean, enhanced appeal, much like grooming horses at auction. Vase paintings from the era depict oiled slaves on platforms, their bodies commodified art. Someone combs your hair, perhaps even trims it. Muttering about maximizing bids, the merchant assesses you one last time, deciding you're too pretty for a field work. Your unblemished skin and symmetrical features mark you for higher value. In Athenian auctions, as per inscriptions from the Acropolis, household slaves commanded premiums, especially youths suited for personal service, often fetching twice the price of laborers. You're positioned with the household slaves, a group of similarly groomed boys and women on a raised dais near the market's center, where the crowd is thickest. The sun beats down, all slick skin attracting flies and stares, as you stand frozen, trying to shrink into invisibility. Round you, the market pulses, vendors hawk bread and figs to onlookers. Scribes record sales on wax tablets, while priests from nearby temples bless transactions, invoking Hermes, god of commerce and thieves. The auctioneer's voice booms across the square, a practiced orator describing lots in glowing terms to inflate bids. For a Thracian warrior slave, he extols strength for an educated Syrian. Literacy, but for your group. The language shifts subtle codes like pleasing appearance and gentle temperament that make certain buyers lean forward, eyes sharpening with interest. These code words, embedded in the auction process, signaled to the elite, not brute labor, but refined service, often veiling the intimate roles awaiting in wealthy homes. Historical analyses from sources like the corpus of Attic inscriptions reveal how auctions were timed for high traffic, post-festivals or assembly days, maximizing exposure. As the bidding for the slave before you escalates, voices shouting offers in drachmae, the auctioneer egging them on with jests. You feel the weight of countless eyes, appraising, desiring. Dismissing, the sensory overload builds, the clamor swells with each sail. Smells intensify as sweat beads on oiled skin. Sights blur into a mosaic of suffering. This is Athens' underbelly, where philosophy met profit, and human dignity was bartered like grain. You stand there, heart pounding, knowing your turn approaches. The Agra's ancient stones absorbing your silent plea for escape. And heated in a city that prided itself on freedom for some. The auctioneer's voice booms across the market as he describes your attributes, your age, your region of origin, your physical condition. He mentions your pleasing appearance and gentle temperament, code words that make certain buyers lean forward with interest, their eyes glinting under the relentless Athenian sun. This is the pinnacle of the Agra's grim theatre, where lives are bartered like camphor of wine. In classical Athens, auctions were a daily ritual, overseen by public officials to ensure fair taxation on sales, with slaves categorized and hyped to maximize profits. The bidding starts low, a murmur of offers in drachmae that echoes the merchant's initial outlay, but climbs quickly as more men join the competition. Voices rising in a frenzy that drowns out the distant calls of vendors hawking olives and figs. You stand frozen on the platform, the wood rough under your oiled feet, trying to disappear into yourself, to become as insubstantial as the shadows creeping across the square. But escape is impossible. Strange hands examine your body with impersonal entitlement, turning you this way and that like a vase on a potter's wheel. Someone forces your mouth open to check your teeth, fingers tasting of garlic and sweat, probing for soundness as if you're a horse at the hippodrome. Another tests the strength of your grip, squeezing your hand until bones ache, gauging if you're fit for a task beyond mere labor. A third runs his fingers through your hair, commenting on its texture and color. Like polished ebony, this one, his voice laced with appreciation that twists your stomach. You're not a person anymore. You're an object being evaluated for purchase. Your worth distilled to drachmae and desires. This dehumanization was systemic in Athenian slave markets, where buyers, often from the elite, treated inspections as social outings, discussing attributes openly while slaves stood mute. Historical records, like those in the Attic stelae listing confiscated property, show how slaves were inventoried alongside furniture, their value tied to physical appeal or skills. With beautiful youths fetching premiums in a society where aesthetics intertwined with power, the bids escalate. Silver promised in escalating amounts 200 drachmae, 300, for as the auctioneer urges them higher with flourishes, a boy of fine stock, unbroken and versatile. The crowd presses closer, a mix of tunics and himarsha, the air thick with anticipation and the underlying current of cruelty. Finally, the hammer falls, the auctioneer's decoration sealing your fate, sold to the gentleman in purple. The winning bidder is a man named Lysander, though you won't learn his name until later, whispered by fellow captives in tones of warning. All you see now is his satisfied smile as he counts out the silver from a pouch heavy with coins, each one clinking like a link in your new chains. His eyes already possess you before the transaction is complete, a gaze that strips away the last illusions of autonomy, promising intimacy laced with ownership. He's middle-aged and well-fed, his frame softened by years of leisure rather than toil, with the soft hands of someone who's never done manual labor, palms smooth as papyrus. Unmarred by calluses or scars, his tunic, his expensive silk imported perhaps from the East via trade routes through Corinth, dye the deep purple that proclaims wealth and status. A hue reserved for the elite since it required thousands of Murex shells to produce, symbolizing affluence in a city where sumptuary laws loosely governed displays of luxury. When he looks at you, there's something in his expression that makes you want to run, a predatory hunger masked by civility, even though the chains round your ankles make escape impossible. They are a constant reminder of your new reality. Lysander steps forward to claim you, a guard unlocking the fetters with a key that jangles mockingly, and you're led away from the platform. The markets roar fading behind as you enter a world of opulent captivity. Lysander owns a large household in the wealthy district of Athens, perhaps in the upscale quarters of Kolytos or Melite, where the air carries the scent of blooming gardens rather than the Agra's filth. These districts, nestled near the Acropolis, housed the city's elite politicians, philosophers, and merchants who built sprawling estates that dwarfed rural villages. His house is bigger than your entire village. A labyrinth of marble columns veined with imported stone from Paros, supporting roofs tiled in terracotta that gleams under the sun. Painted walls depict vibrant frescoes of mythical scenes: Heracles wrestling the Nemean lion, Athena springing from Zeus's head, colors vivid with pigments from Egypt and lapis from afar. A display of wealth that extended to every corner. Elaborate mosaics adorn the floors, tiny tesserae forming images of gods and heroes, Dionysus reclining with satyrs, Poseidon commanding the seas. Each step a reminder of the divine order that justified mortal hierarchies. In ancient Athens, slave ownership was a cornerstone of elite life. Wealthy households like Lysander's could boast dozens of slaves, as evidenced by Xenophon's Oeconomicus, which details estate management. And where slaves outnumbered family members, performing everything from farming distant lands to intimate domestic duties, these estates were microcosms of society. With entrance men's quarters for symposia, gymnasiums for women, and slave quarters tucked away, often in basements or annexes to maintain separation. As you're led through the gates wrought iron flanked by statues of Hermes, guardian of thresholds, servants scurry through corridors carrying trays of food and wine, their movements quick and nervous, eyes darting to avoid notice. And free of gin wine, platters of figs and cheese, all borne with the precision of those who know punishment follows imperfection. You notice that many of them are young men, all of them beautiful in different ways, fair-haired youths from Thrace, dark-eyed boys from Asia Minor, each selected for an aesthetic that complemented the household's luxury. Their faces bear the same look of resigned despair Ray beginning to recognize as the face of captivity. Eyes hollowed by unspoken traumas, postures hunched to minimize visibility. This was typical in wealthy Athenian homes, where slaves were status symbols, their beauty enhancing the owner's prestige during gatherings. Archaeological remains from sites like the House of the Mosaics in Olympus reveal similar layouts, courtyards for daily life, private rooms for indulgences, all supported by a workforce whose humanity was secondary to utility. Lysander's estate, with its peristyle garden blooming with roses and myrtle, hides this underbelly, the scent of flowers masking the sweat of subjugation. As you're pulled deeper into this gilded prison, the marble cool underfoot, you sense the weight of what awaits a life where luxury for one means torment for many. The opulence built on broken spirits like yours. The overseer who claims you from Lysander is named Demetrius, a man whose very presence exudes the unyielding authority of someone who has clawed his way up from the abyss you now enter. He's a former slave himself, purchased young from distant Thrace, or perhaps a war-torn borderland, and worked his way up through a combination of intelligence, ruthlessness, and an uncanny ability to anticipate his master's whims. In ancient Greek households, such figures were common eunuchs or trusted slaves elevated to positions of power over their fellows, a hierarchical structure that mirrored the broader society's pyramid of status, where even among the enslaved divisions ensured control and prevented unity. Demetrius's scars, faint but telling, map a history of survival, a jagged line across his cheek from a long-ago punishment, calluses on hands that once bore chains but now wield the whip. His eyes, sharp as obsidian, miss nothing as he leads you through the house, his grip on your arm firm, guiding yet possessive. The estate unfolds round you in a dizzying display of wealth, corridors lined with frescoes depicting triumphant battles, and serene gods, the air scented with incense from braziers shaped like mythical beasts. But Demetrius wastes no time on awe. He explains the rules with the clipped efficiency of a man who has recited them countless times. His voice a low rumble that brooks no interruption. You will be fed twice daily, barley porridge. In the morning, thick and bland to sustain, but not satisfy, doled out in wooden bowls that slaves must clean themselves, bread and olives in the evening, perhaps a scrap of cheese if the kitchen yields extras. But never enough to forget your station. Clean clothes come once per week, a rough-spun tunic of and dyed wool, washed in the communal trough and mended until it frays beyond use. You will bathe when ordered, often in cold water from the cistern, scrubbed with ashes and oil to remove the day's grime before presentations to guests. Eat when ordered, sleep when ordered. Speak only when spoken to. These are the rhythms of obedience, designed to erode autonomy and instill habit. Their structure wasn't arbitrary. In Athenian domestic slavery, as outlined in Pseudo-Aristotle's Oikonomikos, households operated like many states, with overseers enforcing rigid order to maximize efficiency and minimize rebellion. Slaves were categorized: field workers at rural farms, craftsmen in workshops, domestics for daily chores, and the personal attendants whose roles blurred into intimacy. Demetrius, as Villicus or Epitropos, held sway over all, reporting only to Lysander, his authority bolstered by privileges like better quarters and food, creating a divide-and-conquer dynamic where slaves policed each other. You will never look a free person directly in the eyes, he continues, for such presumption invites the lash eyes downcast symbolize submission. A cultural norm rooted in the Greek emphasis on hierarchy, where even free men averted gazes from superiors. You will never refuse an order, no matter what that order might be. The penalty swift: flogging in the courtyard for minor infractions, sail to the mines for grave ones. And then comes the part that makes your blood freeze in your veins, a chill that seeps deeper than the stone floors underfoot. You are here to serve the master and his guests in whatever capacity they require. This service may involve pouring wine from ornate craters during feasts, serving food on silver platters etched with heroic scenes, cleaning rooms with brooms of bundled twigs and rags, or providing entertainment. The word hangs heavy, laden with implication, the nature of this entertainment. Demetrius explains with a cruel smile that doesn't reach his eyes, will become clear in time. His tone suggests it's no mere flute-playing or recitation. In elite households, entertainment often veiled the exploitation of slaves' bodies, a practice alluded to in Plato's dialogues and forensic speeches, where young male slaves were expected to gratify guests' desires, their youth commodified in the name of hospitality. Some slaves resist at first, he continues, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. But resistance only leads to pain whips that flay skin, isolation in lightless cells, or worse, branding with hot irons to mark the defiant. Compliance, on the other hand, can lead to certain privileges: better food like figs or honeyed bread pilfered from the larder, a warmer place to sleep, perhaps a blanket of wool instead of straw. Even small personal possessions, a carved figurine or a scrap of papyrus for secret writings. These incentives were key to the hierarchical structure, fostering competition among slaves and loyalty to the system, as historical analyses of manumission records show how favored slaves sometimes earned freedom after years of service, though rare for those in intimate roles. Your new quarters are in the basement of the house, a descent into dimness via steep stairs worn smooth by countless feet, the air growing cooler and damper with each step. This andronitis, or slave wing, was standard in large villas, segregated to contain noise and odors, with thick stone walls designed to muffle sound. You quickly learn why this is necessary. As echoes of whimpers and commands hint at nights ahead, a series of small cells line the corridor, each barely larger than a tomb, containing a straw mattress infested with vermin, a thin blanket moth-eaten and coarse, and a chamber pot of cracked clay that must be emptied daily. Torchlight flickers from sconces, casting long shadows that dance like spectres, the stone damp with seepage from above, fostering a perpetual chill that seeps into bones. In this subterranean world, hierarchy persists. Older slaves claim cells closer to the stairs for faint warmth, while newcomers like you get the farthest, where darkness reigns deepest. Demetrius shoves you into one. The door a heavy wooden slab reinforced with iron creaking shut behind, though not locked yet. A small mercy or test. The walls, rough hewn from local marble quarries, bear faint scratches, names, pleas, tallies of days, etched by predecessors in futile rebellion. This setup reflected broader Greek domestic slavery, where basements or outbuildings house the majority, allowing free family privacy while enabling surveillance overseers like Demetrius patrolled nightly, ensuring silence and submission. As he leaves, his footsteps fading up the stairs, the rules echo in your mind. A litany of loss. No voice, no gaze, no refusal. The entertainment looms unspoken, a shadow over your soul, in a system where even among the chained, power trickled down to crush the weakest. You curl on the mattress, straw pricking skin, the weight of the house above pressing like fate, wondering if compliance will save you or merely prolong the breaking. The other slaves welcome you with a mixture of sympathy and warning, their faces illuminated by the faint glow of a single oil lamp smuggled into the basement after dark, its flame-dancing shadows. Across the stone walls like restless spirits, there's Marcus, a boy about your age who's been here for 2 years, his eyes holding depths of pain that seem impossible for someone so young. Wide and haunted as if they've witnessed the underworld itself, captured during a raid on his coastal village in Ionia, where Persian incursions and Greek skirmishes turned homes into battlegrounds. He was sold southward through the markets of Ephesus before ending up in Athens, his slight frame, once suited for fishing nets, now bears faint scars from early resistances, a reminder of the futility of defiance in this house. Then there's Alexios, older and scarred, his broad shoulders slumped under the weight of perhaps a decade in chains. He hails from the mines of Thrace, traded to Lysander after proving too unruly for hard labor. His body a canvas of welts and burns that tell stories he shares only in whispers. And there's Philemon, barely 14, but with the haunted expression of someone much older, his delicate features still soft despite the shadows. He was once the son of a small merchant family in Corinth until his father's business failed amid the economic upheavals of the Peloponnesian War, creditors seizing everything including the children to settle debts, a common fate in a society where financial ruin often equated to loss of freedom. These boys huddled in the dim cell during stolen moments when Demetrius's patrols lapse form a fragile brotherhood born of shared suffering, their backstories weaving a tapestry of Greece's fractured world. Wars that ravaged city-states, debts that ensnared the poor, raids that stole the innocent. Marcus leans in, his voice a hushed murmur, warning of the master's moods and the overseer's tricks, while Alexios grunts advice on enduring pain. Breathe deep, retreat inside. But it's Philemon who explains what really happens during the symposiums, his voice devoid of emotion, as if recounting a distant myth, though his trembling hands betray the fresh wounds. Greek culture celebrated the symposium, the drinking party where educated men gathered to discuss philosophy, politics, and art. These were sophisticated affairs, intellectually stimulating conversations between the greatest minds of the ancient world. At least that's how they're remembered in the polished annals of history. Yet the reality was often very different, especially when the wine flowed freely and the guests demanded more intimate entertainment. A duality rooted in the symposium's cultural role as both intellectual salon and hedonistic escape. In classical Athens, as depicted in Plato's Symposium and Xenophon's accounts, these gatherings were male-only rituals held in the andron, the men's quarters of elite homes like Lysander's, where participants reclined on couches ranged in a circle, fostering equality among free citizens while excluding women, slaves, and outsiders except when those slaves served as objects of discussion or desire. The evening began with libations to Dionysus, god of wine and ecstasy, whose dual nature mirrored the event, rational discourse giving way to uninhibited revelry. Wine, mixed with water in ornate craters painted with scenes of revelry, was poured by young slaves, symbolizing the host's hospitality and wealth. Discussions might range from the Socratic method to Pericles strategies, voices rising in passionate debate under the flicker of lamps fueled by olive oil from the hostess. Estates, but as the night deepened, the hedonistic side emerged. Flute girls, all trades providing music, games like kotobos where wine dregs were flicked at targets, and increasingly, the exploitation of slaves for physical pleasures, a practice normalized in a culture that viewed the body as a vessel for both mind and appetite. Philemon describes how the slaves were expected to serve not just food and drink, but themselves, their youth and beauty part of the entertainment's allure. The philosophers who debated the nature of virtue and justice by day had no qualms about using young slaves for their pleasure by night, a contradiction embedded in Greek thought where Eros love encompassed both Platonic ideals and carnal acts, often idealized in pederasty among free men, are coercive for the enslaved. Vase paintings from the era illustrate this duality, symposiasts in earnest conversation on one side, entangled with youths on the other, the wine loosening inhibitions and blurring boundaries. The same men who wrote beautiful poetry about love and honor, think of Altman's odes, or Anacreon's lyrics, treated their human property like living toys to be used and discarded at will. Their hedonism justified by a philosophy that ranked souls hierarchically, slaves deemed lesser, beings unfit for a true reciprocity. As Philemon speaks, the lamp's flame gutters, casting his face in stark relief, his words painting a picture of nights where intellectual heights plunged into moral depths, the symposium's cultural prestige masking its shadows. Marcus nods solemnly, adding tales of guests quoting Homer while committing acts that would shame the gods, while Alexios warns of the morning after bruises hidden under tunics, spirits fractured anew. In this basement confessional, their backstories and explanations forge a bond, a quiet resistance in shared knowledge, preparing you for the dual-faced beast of the symposium, a beacon of Greek culture's brilliance. Yet a pit where vulnerability was devoured under the guise of sophistication. The oil lamp sputters out, plunging the cell into darkness, but the warnings linger, echoes of a world where intellect and indulgence danced a dangerous tango on the backs of the broken. Philemon describes the preparation rituals with a voice devoid of emotion, as if he's talking about someone else's life. His words hanging in the dim basement are like smoke from a dying lamp. The slaves are bathed and oiled, their bodies made smooth and gleaming under the overseer's watchful eye, a process that begins hours before the guests arrive. Water from the household cistern, scented with herbs like rosemary or lavender pilfered from the garden, is poured over skin in the communal trough. Rough sponges scrubbing away the day's sweat and grime until flesh shines like polished marble. Then comes the oil-precious olive oil mixed with essences of myrrh or rose, applied with hands that know too well the contours of compliance, making limbs supple and inviting. This ritual, echoed in ancient vase paintings depicting symposium preparations, wasn't mere hygiene. It was a deliberate enhancement, transforming slaves into aesthetic objects. Their natural forms accentuated to appeal to the elite's refined tastes. They're given special tunics, thin fabric of fine linen or silk that clings to their forms like a second skin, designed more to entice than to clothe. Translucent under torchlight to hint at what lies beneath, sometimes they're adorned with jewelry, gold and bracelets forged in the city's workshops, necklaces of amber beads from distant Baltic trades, or talks of silver that mark them as ornamental rather than utilitarian status symbols for the host as much as decorations. These accoutrements drew from the cultural opulence of symposia where hosts like Lysander vied to outdo one another. Historical references to events like the grand banquet in Plato's Symposium showing how such gatherings featured adorned attendants, their beauty complementing the intellectual discourse. In that famous account, philosophers like Socrates and Aristophanes reclined amid similar preparations, debating love while youths poured wine, the line between servant and spectacle blurred. The symposium begins formally enough, the guests reclining on couches ranged round the room in a circle symbolizing equality among free men, though the hierarchy over slaves remains ironclad. These couches padded with cushions stuffed with wool and embroidered with mythical scenes face inward toward a central table laden with delicacies, roasted quail from the hills, honeyed figs from Attica's orchards, cheeses from Lesbos, all presented on silver platters that gleam under the light of hanging lamps. Slaves like you move silently at the edges, pouring wine from ornate oenitui into kylix cups. The red vintage from Chios or Thasos diluted with water in a crater painted with Dionysian revels. The conversation might touch on the nature of democracy, with guests invoking Pericles' funeral oration, the philosophy of Socrates recounting his latest paradoxes from the Agra, or the latest military campaigns against Sparta, debates, heated yet civil voices rising in the Androntheco. This intellectual phase draws from renowned symposia, like the one hosted by Agathon, where old Chibiotis crashed inebriated, as Plato recounts, blending eros with dialectic among attendees like Posnius and Eryximachus, physicians and rhetoricians whose public personas masked private indulgences. Xenophon's Symposium similarly features Socrates amid entertainers, discussions on virtue interspersed with flute music and acrobatics, highlighting how these events were crucibles for Greek thought, birthing ideas that shaped Western philosophy. These are educated, cultured men who pride themselves on their intellectual sophistication, quoting Homer's epics or Heraclitus fragments, their minds as sharp as the daggers at their belts. But as the evening progresses and the wine takes effect cup after cup, the mixture growing stronger as restraint wanes, the tone shifts inexorably. The philosophical discussions give way to cruder entertainment, stories becoming bawdy jokes laced with double entendres, intellectual debates devolving into boastful competitions over conquests. Both martial and amorous, laughter grows coarser, echoing off the mosaic floors depicting satyrs in pursuit, a fitting backdrop. The slaves who have been serving silently round the edges of the room suddenly find themselves the center of attention, pulled from shadows into the lamplight's glare. It starts with small requests. Pour wine for this guest, his hand brushing yours lingeringly. Massage the shoulders of that one, fingers digging in with possessive force. Feed grapes to the man on the corner couch, his lips parting expectantly, eyes locked on yours. Each task seems innocent enough at first, a veneer of hospitality, but you learn to read the signs the way conversations quiet when you approach. A hush pregnant with anticipation, the lingering touches that have nothing to do with serving wine. Hands wandering under tunics with casual entitlement, the way certain guests watch your movements with predatory interest, their gazes stripping away the thin fabric of pretense. Historical echoes abound. In Aristophanes' comedies like The Wasps, symposiums are satirized for descending into debauchery. while forensic speeches by Lysias reveal lawsuits stemming from drunken excesses at such parties. Where slaves bore the brunt, attendees like the sophist Protagoras or the general Alcibiades, known for their charisma and appetites, exemplified this shift, their philosophical facades crumbling under Dionysus' influence. The Ethicans with unspoken intent the room's warmth from braziers mirroring the rising heat of desires as the symposium's dual nature reveals itself, a forum for minds by day, a playground for bodies by night where curiosity about ideas gives way to cruder hungers and slaves like you become the unwitting stars of a spectacle scripted in power and wine. But this is only the beginning. Over the following months you learned that what happened that first night was considered mild by the standards of the house, a mere initiation into a world where abuse were. As many masks, each more insidious than the last. Some guests have specific preferences, particular cruelties they enjoy inflicting, tailored to their whims like bespoke tunics from the finest weavers. One might favor psychological torments whispering degradations while forcing acts that erode the soul, his words carving deeper than any blade. Another delights in physical marks, using cords or heated wax to inscribe temporary ownership the painted canvas for his artistry. Others compete to see who can break a slave's spirit most completely, turning symposiums into arenas where be. It's a placed on entrance, laughter rising as resolve crumbles, a grotesque parody of the Olympic Games where the prize is dominance, not laurels. The overseer Demetrius encourages this behavior, knowing that broken slaves are compliant slaves, his nods of approval from the shadows reinforcing the hierarchy tactic. Rooted in the power dynamics of Greek society where fear was the mortar binding the social pyramid. In classical Athens, as Aristotle posited in his Politics, natural hierarchies justified mastery over the barbarian or weak. Extending to households, where overseers like Demetrius, often freedmen themselves, wielded authority. To maintain order, their encouragement of abuse a means to prevent rebellion and ensure productivity, mirroring how city-states used public spectacles of punishment to deter dissent. You discover that the household operates on a complex hierarchy of abuse, a microcosm of societies. Stratified cruelty. The newest slaves bear the worst treatment, serving as fresh meat for the guests' appetites, their novelty exciting the jaded elite who tire of familiar faces, much like how Athenian democracy excluded slaves and women, reserving rights for citizens while exploiting the rest. Those who survive long enough might be promoted to different roles, personal servants to less. Violent masters attending to grooming or errands with relative safety, or kitchen workers who rarely interact with guests, directly chopping onions and stirring pots in the steamy confines, their scars hidden amid the hearths. But promotion requires more than just survival. It demands a complete surrender of dignity, a willingness to participate in your own dehumanization. Perhaps by reporting on fellow slaves or performing with feigned enthusiasm, internalizing the role until self vanishes. This self-betrayal echoes the social commentary on Greek power dynamics, where philosophers like Plato in the Republic idealized justice yet lived in a world where the powerful rationalized exploit. Slaves complicit in their chains to gain scraps of favor, perpetuating a cycle where dominance trickled down, the oppressed oppressing in turn. Some slaves tried to resist at first, their spirits unbowed by the initial shocks. Marcus attempted to escape during his first month scaling the garden wall under moonlight, only to be recaptured by Patro. L.S. beaten so severely that he walked with a limp for weeks afterward, his defiance a lesson etched in bruises for all to see. Alexios once refused a particularly degrading order, perhaps to debase himself before jeering guests, and spent 3 days chained in the courtyard without food or water, exposed to the elements, scorching sun by day, blistering skin, chill nights gnawing at bones. His suffering a public example that silenced whispers of rebellion. But resistance, you learn, takes many forms beyond overt defiance, subtle threads in the fabric of subjugation. Some slaves retreat so deeply into themselves that they become like walking corpses, present in body but absent in spirit, eyes vacant as they perform tasks mechanically. Their withdrawal a silent protest against a world that demands their essence. Others develop a kind of desperate cunning, learning to anticipate their master's moods through careful observation, the frow of Lysander's brow signaling anger, certain slur in guest speech, foretelling violence, and avoid the worst punishments through submission that borders on prescience, dodging blows by preempting desires. This adaptability highlights the power imbalances in Greek society, where the elite's whims dictated life and death, slaves navigating like sailors in stormy seas. Their ingenuity a survival tool in a culture that praised cunning in heroes like Odysseus, yet crushed it in the lowly, and a few, the lucky ones, simply die, whether from disease sweeping through cramped quarters, injury from unchecked brutality, or sheer despair that saps the will to breathe. Death becomes a form of liberation, a quiet exit from the symposium stage. You've seen slaves simply stop eating, their bowls untouched until emaciation claims them, stop responding to orders, stares blank until whips fail to rouse, stop caring whether they live or die. Bodies wasting as souls depart early. The overseers usually replace them quickly, Demetrius marching to the Agra for fresh acquisitions. There's always a fresh supply of young bodies available at the slave markets. War and debt ensuring an endless stream. This disposability underscores the grim commentary on Greek power, a civilization lauding humanism yet treating humans as expendable, the elite's leisure, built on replaceable lives, where sympathy was a luxury afforded only to equals, and the vulnerable were cogs in the machine of progress, their resistance overt or inward, a fleeting spark against an unyielding dark. The psychological techniques used to break slaves are as sophisticated as they are cruel, refined over generations in a society that prided itself on reason yet wielded emotion as a weapon with surgical precision. Isolation is one of the most effective weapons, a silent blade that severs you from the roots of your being. You're cut off from everyone you've ever known. The faces of family fading like echoes in a vast cave, surrounded instead by people who are as powerless as you are. The other slaves can offer sympathy in stolen glances or whispered words during brief respites, but they can't provide protection or hope. Their own chains are mirror to your despair, fostering a loneliness that gnaws deeper than hunger. This tactic wasn't accidental. In ancient Greece, social structures emphasized the oikos household as a self-contained unit. Slaves were deliberately isolated to prevent alliances or escapes. History. Cal accounts from Xenophon's Oikonomicus illustrating how masters cultivated dependence, turning isolation into a tool that eroded communal bonds and amplified individual vulnerability. Unpredictability is another tool, a shadow that looms over every moment, keeping you in perpetual suspense. You never know when you'll be summoned. The overseer's footsteps, a lottery of fate. What will be required of you, from mundane chores to intimate degradations, or how severe the punishment might be for the smallest mistake, a spilled drop of wine earning a lash, a hesitant glance inviting worse. This constant uncertainty creates a state of chronic fear, a low hum of dread that wears down resistance more effectively than any physical torture, your nerves frayed like worn ropes. Anticipation becoming its own torment. Cultural norms in classical Athens reinforced this, the capricious gods of mythology, like Zeus hurling thunderbolts on whims, mirrored human masters. Psychological control embedded in a worldview where fate was fickle. As seen in tragedies by Sophocles where characters grapple with unpredictable destinies. Slaves embodying the ultimate victims of such chaos. But perhaps the most insidious technique is the destruction of identity, a slow erasure that strips away the self layer by layer, leaving a hollow shell primed for obedience. They take away your name, the word your mother whispered at birth, tethering you to lineage and give you another. Something that sounds more exotic or pleasing to Greek ears, like Thrax for a Thracian or Perses for an Eastern captive, reducing heritage to novelty. They forbid you from speaking your native language, lashing tongues that slip into forbidden dialects, or practicing your family's customs, the harvest rites or hearth prayers that once anchored your world. They dress you in their clothes, coarse chittens, mimicking citizen garb but marking servitude. Feed you their food, barley gruel spiced with alien herbs. Force you to worship their gods, prostrating before altars to Zeus or Dionysus, while your own deities fade into whispers. Slowly, systematically, they erase everything that made you who you were, a cultural assimilation that was policy in Greek slavery. As evidenced by Aristotle's justifications in politics, where barbarians were deemed naturally inferior, their identities supplanted to fit the Hellenic mold, fostering a loss of self that made rebellion unthinkable. The guests who visit the house represent the cream of Athenian society, wealthy merchants who command trade fleets across the Mediterranean, government officials shaping laws in the assembly, renowned philosophers pondering the cosmos in academies, celebrated artists sculpting marble into eternal forms, men whose names are recorded in history as great contributors to human civilization, their legacies etched in stone and scroll. Yet here in the privacy of Lysander's dining room, amid the glow of lamps and the haze of wine, they shed their public personas like discarded cloaks, revealing appetites that would shock their admirers, a moral contradiction at the heart of Greek ethics, where virtue was preached but not always practiced. There's Dionysus, a respected politician known for his speeches about justice and civic virtue. His orations in the Knicks echoing Pericles' ideals, championing the rights of citizens and speaking eloquently about the moral foundations of society, invoking Solon's reforms to argue for equity among the free. In private, he delights in humiliating young slaves, forcing them to perform degrading acts, while he quotes passages from Homer, lines from the Iliad about heroic honor twisted into mockery. As if the epic's grandeur justifies his baseness. His laughter mingling with tears, he elicits a hypocrisy that underscores how Athenian democracy exalted citizen rights, while ignoring the enslaved moral blindness allowing public piety and private vice to coexist. Then there's Cleomenes, a wealthy merchant who funds public works like temples and fountains, praised for his generosity to the poor through euagetism, civic donations that earned him laurels, and statues in the Agora, his name synonymous with philanthropy in a culture that valued public benefaction as a path to immortality. His charitable reputation masks a taste for a violence that leaves slaves scarred and broken, welts blooming like dark flowers under skin. As he wields whips or rods with sadistic precision during entertainments, he views his cruelty as a form of education, claiming that pain teaches valuable lessons about the natural order of society. Echoing sophists like Thrasymachus who argued might makes right, his actions a lived philosophy where the powerful instruct the weak through suffering. A stark contradiction to his public facade that highlights Greek society's compartmentalization: philanthropy for peers, brutality for property. Moral contradictions woven into the fabric of a civilization that birthed ethics yet tolerated profound inequities. Most disturbing of all is sophist, a philosopher who writes treatises on ethics and the nature of the good life, his public teachings emphasizing the importance of virtue, self-control, and respect for the divine order delivered in the shaded colonnades of the academy or lyceum where eager students hang on his words like vines on a trellis. His scrolls circulated among the educated elite argue for a harmonious soul balanced between reason and desire, drawing from predecessors like Socrates to posit that true happiness lies in moral excellence. Ideas that would influence generations and cement his place in history's pantheon of thinkers. But when wine loosens his tongue and darkens his heart during these private gatherings, he becomes a monster who justifies every cruelty with elaborate philosophical arguments, twisting logic to rationalize the irrational, claiming that slaves, as natural inferiors, benefit from subjugation, their suffering a path to enlightenment. Or that pleasure derived from dominance exemplifies the soul's mastery over base matter. This duality isn't unique to him. It permeates the elite where public virtue masks private vice, a moral blindness that extends throughout Greek society. The same culture that produced magnificent art, groundbreaking philosophy, and innovative political systems also normalized the complete dehumanization of entire classes of people. The contradiction isn't accidental, it's structural. The leisure time that allowed free citizens to pursue intellectual and artistic endeavors was built on the backs of slave labor. As Aristotle explicitly argued in his Politics, justifying slavery as essential for the polis's functioning, positing that some are born to rule and others to serve, their souls suited for bondage. Historical parallels abound. Plato's Republic envisions an ideal state with slaves as mere tools, while even democratic Athens, birthplace of equality among citizens, held auctions in the agora where humans were bartered like livestock, the philosophers debating ethics smear streets away, oblivious or complicit. A man can be generous to his neighbors, just to his peers, and cruel to his slaves without any sense of inconsistency. This compartmentalization, a hallmark of Greek thought where moral categories were rigidly stratified, virtue applied to equals, utility to inferiors, as months turn into years. You develop survival strategies that would have been unimaginable to your younger self. Adaptive mechanisms forged in the crucible of constant threat. Much like how Spartan helots or Thracian mind workers, as described in Herodotus and Thucydides, evolved subtle resistances within oppressive systems. You learn to read the subtle signs that indicate a guest's mood and preferences, a tightened jaw signale, an impatience, better to approach with downcast eyes and swift service, a lingering gaze foretelling demands, prompting preemptive compliance to mitigate severity. You discover which behaviors are most likely to earn rewards, a demure smile earning an extra olive, flawless obedience granting a moment's rest, and which will result in punishment. Like hesitation, inviting the whip's kiss, you master the art of psychological absence, appearing compliant while retreating so deeply into yourself that your spirit remains untouchable. A dissociation technique echoed in survivor accounts from ancient texts, such as Euripides' portrayals of captives in Hecuba who mentally detached to endure violation, preserving an inner core amid external desecration. Philosophical writings like Epictetus' later Stoic teachings, though post-dating this era, retroactively parallel this strategy, advocating control over the mind when the body is enslaved. A mindset that slaves might have intuitively adopted to reclaim agency in powerlessness. But survival comes at a cost. Each compromise with evil chips away at something essential inside you, eroding self-worth like waves on a cliff. Each moment of submission reinforces the lesson that you are powerless, worthless, disposable, internalizing the oppressor's narrative until doubt creeps in per. P.S. Aristotle was right, perhaps this is your natural state. The boy who once ran laughing through olive groves becomes a hollow-eyed young man who moves through life like a ghost haunting his own body. His transformation a testament to the system's efficacy, breaking not just bodies but wills. As seen in the philosophical justifications that frame slavery as benevolent tutelage, slaves improved through hardship, a delusion that allowed thinkers to sleep soundly while their property suffered. Yet even in this erosion, fragments of resistance persist. Tiny rebellions like savoring a forbidden memory during tasks, or sharing a knowing glance with Marcus, affirming humanity in defiance of doctrines that deny it. Over time, these strategies harden into armor, but the weight grows heavier. Each day a negotiation between endurance and erasure, in a society blind to its own contradictions, where philosophers exalted the soul while crushing countless others underfoot. The other slaves become your only family, bound together by shared trauma and mutual protection in a world that seeks to atomize and conquer. Their faces the soul anchors in a sea of isolation. You develop a silent language of glances and gestures, a quick nod warning of Demetrius's approach, a subtle hand signal sharing hidden scraps of food ways to communicate warnings and offer comfort without alerting the overseers, a covert network that echoes the underground solidarity among slaves. In ancient Greece, where historical fragments from Ostraka pottery shards used for writing reveal whispered alliances and mutual aid pacts in households and mines, defying the system's divide-and-rule tactics, you share what little food you can spare, a morsel of bread passed under cover of darkness, take turns standing watch during the few hours of rest you're allowed. One eye open for patrols while others snatch fitful sleep, and hold each other when the nightmares become too much to bear alone. Arms encircling trembling forms in the basement's chill, a human warmth that defies the cold stone. Cultural insights into these slave solidarity networks highlight how, despite the crushing weight of oppression, enslaved people in classical Greece formed resilient bonds, often drawing from shared ethnic origins or common experiences, Thracians clustering from uttered songs in their tongue, or war captives exchanging tales of lost battles, creating informal families that provided emotional sustenance, as glimpsed in Aristophanes' plays where slaves banter in solidarity, or in legal records of collective escapes that underscore the power of unity. But even these relationships are tainted by the system that created them, poisoned vines in a barren garden. Competition for the master's favor can turn friends into enemies overnight. The promise of better treatment, a softer mattress, an extra blanket tempting someone to betray a planned escape or report another slave's minor transgression, like holding a fig or speaking forbidden words. Marcus might eye your portion suspiciously during lean times, or Alexios withhold a warning if it means his own advancement. The hierarchy infiltrating even the oppressed, mirroring broader Greek social dynamics where ambition fractured alliances, as in Thucydides' accounts of civil strife where self-interest trumped loyalty. The very bonds that keep you sane also become tools for your oppression, overseers like Demetrius exploiting divisions by favoring one over another, dangling privileges to sow distrust. A strategy akin to how Athenian generals divided conquered peoples to prevent uprisings. Historical tactics that ensured subjugation through internal conflict. The physical abuse is constant and varied, a relentless storm that batters body and will, Some guests prefer their entertainment to be subtle. Psychological domination that leaves no visible marks but carves deep wounds in the spirit. Words that demean and degrade until self-worth dissolves like salt in water. Others are more direct, using fists and whips and heated metal to inscribe their ownership on slave bodies, bruises flying in purples and blacks, scars knitting into permanent reminders of power's touch. Still others take pleasure in elaborate tortures that combine physical pain with sexual humiliation in ways that defy description, acts that twist the symposium's revelry into nightmares. Their creativity a dark reflection of Greek innovation in arts and sciences. But it's the casual nature of the cruelty that proves most devastating a banality that normalizes horror. A guest might pause in the middle of a philosophical discussion to strike a slave for no reason other than boredom, his hand lashing out mid-sentence on virtue. Another might interrupt his recitation of poetry lines from Sappho on love as sweetness to demand. Increasingly degrading acts from the evening as entertainment, the shift as seamless as changing tunes on a lyre. The violence isn't passionate or personal. It's as routine as pouring wine or lighting lamps embedded in daily life, like the cultural acceptance of slavery itself, where even enlightened thinkers like P. Lotto own slaves without qualm their treatises on justice silent on the injustice at home. The slaves learn to treat their own bodies as foreign objects, things that happen to house their consciousness, but don't really belong to them, a detachment that allows entrance but severs connection to self. You develop the ability to float above yourself during the worst moments, to observe your own suffering with a kind of detached curiosity. Mind adrift like a boat unmoored while the storm rages below, a survival skill paralleled in Stoic philosophies later articulated by Epictetus, a former slave himself, who taught enduring pain by distinguishing between what is and isn't in one's control, though in your era such insights were intuitive grasps at sanity amid chaos. It's a survival mechanism, this dissociation, but it comes with its own price, a growing disconnection from your own humanity that mirrors the way your masters see you as tools. Not souls eroding empathy and joy until existence is mere persistence. As your second year in the house begins, you notice changes in yourself that go beyond the obvious physical scars, transformations that creep like ivy over stone, reshaping you irrevocably. Your voice sounds different, flatter, more careful. Stripped of the regional accent that once marked you as a child of the mountains. The lilting tones sanded away by constant correction and silence, a linguistic assimilation that reflects broader Greek cultural hegemony, where conquered peoples adopted Attic Greek to survive. Losing native cadences in the process, your posture has changed too. You move with the hunched shoulders and downcast eyes of someone who has learned that visibility leads to suffering, a bodily language of submission ingrained through repetition, much like how these paintings depict slaves in subservient poses, their forms curved in deference to underscore social order. More disturbing are the changes in your thinking. You catch yourself automatically calculating the preferences and moods of free people even when they have no power over you. A hypervigilance that spills beyond the household. You flinch at unexpected sounds and movements. Body wired for threat, you find yourself grateful for small mercies, an extra piece of bread, a night without summoning. A master who is merely indifferent rather than actively cruel pathos in crumbs that highlight the system. A psychological grip. This psychological conditioning is perhaps the system's greatest success. It creates slaves who don't just obey out of fear but who internalize their powerlessness so completely that resistance becomes literally unthinkable. A self-policing that echoes Plato's allegory of the cave, where prisoners accept shadows as reality, unwilling to seek light, or Aristotle's natural slavery doctrine internalized as truth. The masters don't need to constantly watch and threaten because their victims have learned to police themselves, vigilance turned inward. a triumph of control that allowed Greek society to flourish on exploited labor. Philosophers pondering freedom, while chains clanked unheard. Yet, even in this environment of systematic dehumanization, small acts of resistance persist like embers in ash, defying the wind that seeks to extinguish them. Slaves develop subtle ways to maintain their dignity and humanity. Invisible threads of rebellion woven into the daily fabric of servitude. They share stories of their homelands during fleeting moments in the basement, whispered tales of mountain festivals or coastal harvests that keep alive memories their masters try to erase. Preserving cultural fragments against the tide of Hellenic assimilation, they create art from scraps, tiny sculptures molded from bread dough and hidden in wall crevices, songs hummed quietly for overseers to hear, evoking melodies from distant villages or poems composed in languages their captors don't understand, etched mentally and recited in silence. These acts echo historical insights into Greek slave resistance, where archaeological finds like inscribed pottery from slave quarters reveal hidden expressions of identity, subtle defiances that affirm selfhood in a system designed to obliterate it. Most importantly, they bear witness, in whispered conversations during brief moments of privacy. They share their experiences and validate each other's suffering, naming the cruelties and the perpetrators, ensuring that the truth isn't swallowed by silence. They remember the names of those who have died, murmuring them like incantations to prevent complete erasure. Turning memory into a weapon against forgetting, they document abuses in their minds, preserving evidence of crimes that their society refuses to acknowledge. A form of oral history that parallels the underground narratives among helots in Sparta or mine. Workers in Lorien, where tales of injustice were passed down, fueling sporadic revolts and underscoring the human need to testify even in chains. This bearing witness becomes a form of resistance in itself, by insisting on their own humanity and the reality of their suffering. The slaves resist the master narrative that portrays them as contented property or willing participants in their own exploitation, challenging the philosophical justifications like those in Plato's works that frame slaves as happy in servitude, maintaining the possibility that someday someone will listen to their stories and recognize their truth. But such resistance requires enormous courage and comes with deadly risks. Slaves caught communicating in their native languages might have their tongues cut out, a brutal punishment documented in ancient legal texts as a means to enforce linguistic conformity. Those found sharing food or offering comfort to fellow slaves could be separated or sold to cruel masters, disrupting bonds and amplifying isolation. The very acts that preserve humanity also invite punishment designed to destroy it, to precarious balance where defiance dances on a knife's edge, reflecting the broader tensions in Greek society, where freedom of speech was vaunted for citizens but silence for the enslaved. The house itself, a microcosm of these contradictions. The house becomes a character in this story, its marble halls echoing with the ghosts of countless victims, grand columns standing sentinel over hidden agonies. The opulent facade a mask for the rot within, its decorated walls, adorned with frescoes of triumphant gods and heroes. Concealed chambers where unspeakable acts occur nightly, the vibrant colors clashing with the pallor of suffering slaves. The beautiful mosaics, intricate patterns of Dionysian revels, or Athena's wisdom and painted frescoes provide a grotesque contrast to the human misery they shell-taught, and horror coexisting in the same space, symbolizing the broader contradictions of a civilization built on others' suffering. This duality mirrors Greek culture at large, the Parthenon rising majestic on the Acropolis while slaves toiled in quarries below, philosophical academies debating ethics amid a slave economy that enabled their leisure. The house embodying how beauty and brutality intertwined, each feeding the other in a symbiotic nightmare. In the third year, something breaks inside you that you didn't even know could break, a fundamental fracture during a particularly elaborate symposium celebrating a military victory. Against a neighboring city-state, the guests more numerous than usual, their celebration more intense, wine flowing like rivers of forgetfulness, demands more creative in their cruelty. You're brought before a group of young aristocrats, barely older than yourself, but already drunk on wine and inherited power, their faces flushed with entitlement. Eyes gleaming with malicious invention, they've devised what they consider an amusing gamer contest to see who can elicit the most entertaining reactions from their human toys, taking turns issuing commands, each more humiliating than the last, while keeping score, like children playing knucklebones, laughter pealing as you comply, body moving mechanically while spirit recoils. As you perform their degrading spectacle acts that strip away layers of self like flaying skin, something fundamental shifts in your perception. You stop seeing yourself as a person forced to endure terrible things and begin seeing yourself as exactly what they see. Thing that exists for their amusement, devoid of intrinsic worth, a vessel for their whims. The last thread connecting you to the boy who once herded goats in mountain pastures finally snaps, severed by the weight of accumulated shame, leaving a void where identity once resided. This psychological death is almost a relief. Without hope or dignity to protect, there's no more pain in surrender, emotions flattening into a grey expanse where suffering loses its sting. A numbness that envelops like a shroud. You become the perfect slave, anticipating needs before they're voiced, accepting any treatment without resistance, existing in a state of complete compliance that requires no thought or feeling, your movements precise as an automaton from Hephaestus' forged spirit, dormant in self-preservation. Historical accounts of long-term slaves like those in Demosthenes' orations describing broken individuals sold as docile hint at this numbness as a common endpoint, a psychological adaptation, where the mind retreats to survive, mirroring philosophical notions in cynic teachings of detachment, though here it's trauma's gift, not wisdom's choice. The overseers notice the change, the hollow compliance, the mechanical precision, and reward it with calculated generosity. Minor concessions that feel like lifelines in the abyss, but serve only to bind you tighter to the system. You're given better clothes, a tunic of finer wool that doesn't chafe as harshly against scarred skin, more regular meals, perhaps an extra portion of olives or a sliver of cheese. Sustenance that rebuilds strength without restoring spirit, and a cell with an actual window. A narrow slit high in the wall admitting slivers of sunlight and glimpses of the sky, a taunt of freedom just out of reach. Other slaves look at you with a mixture of envy and horror, their eyes reflecting the cost you've paid for these privileges, recognizing the emptiness behind your perfection. A walking testament to the system's triumph in crafting obedience from oblivion. This reward structure was integral to Greek slave management, as detailed in Pseudo-Aristotle's Oikonomikos, where incentives like improved conditions encouraged loyalty, turning broken individuals into models for others, perpetuating control through aspiration amid despair. But even in this state of psychological numbness, fragments of awareness persist, faint sparks in the void. You observe the household rhythms with the detached interest of someone watching a play from afar, noting patterns in the guests' behavior, cycles of violence and indulgence that follow predictable patterns, ebbs and flows tied to festivals or political seasons. You begin to understand the economics of suffering that keep the system functioning, a cold calculus where human lives are ledger entries, profits weighed against costs in a market-driven machine. The house operates on a constant supply of fresh victims, young slaves rarely lasting more than a few years before they're either broken beyond usefulness or aged beyond their master's preferences. A value depreciating like worn coins. Historical details on slave life cycles reveal this turnover was standard in classical Athens. Epigraphic evidence from manumission records shows average service spans of 5 to 10 years. For domestic slaves, with youths prized for a beauty-facing shorter careers due to rapid burnout, replaced to maintain novelty and vitality in elite entertainments. Some die from disease epidemics sweeping cramped quarters like the plague of 430 BCE that ravaged Athens, as Thucydides chronicled, claiming slaves alongside citizens. Others from injury and checked wounds festering without care. A few simply disappear one night, their fate unrecorded and unlamented, perhaps sold quietly or disposed in darker ways. This turnover necessitates regular visits to the slave markets. You sometimes accompany Demetrius on these trips, serving as an example of what proper training can accomplish. A polished product traded to justify the investment, your presence a living advertisement in the address bustle. The irony isn't lost on you, even in numbness. The broken boy who once stood trembling on the auction block now helps evaluate new merchandise for his master's collection. Assessing with eyes that see echoes of your past self, you watch the terror in young faces. Wide eyes mirroring your own long-ago dread, and feel nothing. Also you tell yourself as Demetrius haggles over prices. The markets clamor a familiar din of despair during one market visit. Amid the rows of chained bodies and the auctioneer's rhythmic calls, you encounter a boy who reminds you powerfully of your younger self. A jolt that pierces the fog like a spear through mist. Same dark hair tousled by rough hands. Same frightened eyes scanning for mercy in a merciless crowd. Same desperate search for kindness in a world suddenly turned hostile. He's maybe 13, small for his age, but with the lean strength of someone raised on hard work and simple food, perhaps a farmer's son from the hills sold for debts like you. His posture, a mix of defiance and defeat. Something stirs in the deadness behind your ribs as you watch him, a flicker of recognition that bridges years awakening buried sensations, the scent of olive groves, the warmth of a mother's embrace, the freedom of running under open skies. The sensation is so unexpected and painful that you actually stagger, causing Demetrius to grab your arm and ask if you're ill, his grip a reminder of chains unseen. You lie and say the heat is affecting you, blaming the sun's glare on the agrstones. But the truth is more complicated. Seeing that boy has awakened something you thought permanently extinguished. Not hope exactly, but a recognition that the person you once were deserves to be mourned, that the life stolen from you had value even if no one else acknowledged it. A stirring of memories long suppressed. Historical parallels to slave life cycles emphasize this emotional toll. Accounts in Lysias' speeches describe aged slaves reflecting on lost youths during resales, their encounters with newcomers evoking ghosts of innocence, underscoring how the market's churn perpetuated trauma across generations. The boy is purchased by a different household, sparing you the torture of watching his transformation. His small form led away amid clanking chains, but his image haunts you for weeks afterward. A specter that brings dreams you haven't experienced in those vivid flashes of your mother's cooking, earthen pots simmering with herbs, your father's laugh rumbling like distant thunder, the feeling of wind on your face as you ran through mountain meadows, grass whispering secrets underfoot. These memories are dangerous cracks in the armor of numbness that threaten to let pain flood back, yet they also remind you that somewhere beneath the perfect slave fragments of your original self still exist resilient shards buried but not destroyed. The question becomes whether those fragments are worth preserving, risking the agony of feeling, or whether complete surrender would be a mercy, oblivion's embrace kinder than half-life. In the economics of the household, your stirring goes unnoticed, just another entry in the ledger of turnover, but inside, it plants a seed of quiet unrest. Memories stirring like winds before a storm in the life cycle of a slave whose spirit, though battered, refuses utter annihilation. The answer comes during another symposium, this one quieter than usual. The guests, older men, philosophers, and politicians engaged in serious discussion about the nature of justice and the ideal state. Their voices measured and erudite amid the soft glow of lamps. You serve wine and listen to their debates with the trained invisibility of household property, pouring from a silver oinicho into cups etched with geometric patterns. Your presence is unremarked as the mosaics underfoot. They're discussing the writings of a famous philosopher, perhaps Plato's emerging ideas on the tripartite soul or Aristotle's nascent thoughts on ethics, debating whether virtue can be taught, or whether its innate excellence a gift from the gods or forged through habit. One guest argues that some people are naturally suited for slavery, born with inferior souls that make them incapable of self-governance, echoing Aristotle's later assertions in Politics. Where barbarians and slaves are deemed tools with souls, their subjugation a natural order, benefiting all. Another contends that environment shapes character, that even slaves might be capable of virtue under different circumstances. A nod to Socratic questioning that probes the malleability of the human spirit. Ideas drawn from dialogues like Meno, where knowledge is recollection, implying potential in all. The irony is overwhelming, a bitter tide rising in your throat. These men who rape children and torture the helpless are debating the nature of virtue, while you, their victims, stand silently holding their wine, the kylix heavy in your hands. They speak of justice while perpetrating the greatest injustices, invoking laws of the polis that protect citizens but crush the unfree. They theorize about the ideal state, a harmonious republic where each fulfills their role while creating hell on earth for those under their power. Their philosophical sophistication a veil over barbarity. But listening to their debate, you realize something important, a clarity piercing the numbness like dawn through fog. Their intellectual capacity doesn't excuse their cruelty, it makes it worse. They have the tools to understand the wrongness of their actions, minds honed by years of study in academies shaded by olive trees, yet they choose evil anyway, rationalizing it with the same logic that builds syllogisms. They're not ignorant barbarians acting from instinct, driven by primal urges, unchecked by civilization. They're educated monsters who have philosophized their monstrosities into acceptability, twisting it hicks to fit appetites, much like how sophists argued for relativism, making the weaker case stronger to justify power's excesses. This realization brings a strange kind of clarity. The system isn't the result of ignorance or primitive thinking, it is the product of deliberate choices made by people who know better, but choose worse, a willful blindness embedded in Greek society where democracy flowered for the few and the wilted lives of the many. The beautiful art, the Parthenon's friezes depicting heroic struggles, the philosophical discussions probing the cosmos, the political innovations like the Assembly's votes, none of these represent moral progress. They're just different forms of human expression that coexist comfortably with unlimited cruelty. The Acropolis standing tall while slaves quarry its marble. Thinkers like Democritus pondering atoms while ignoring the atomic suffering round them. Years pass in this state of clear-eyed despair. The calendar measured not in seasons, but in summons and scars. You perfect the art of invisible service, moving through the household like a ghost that occasionally assumes solid form when needed, anticipating Lysander's needs with eerie precision. Your numbness a shield against the parade of abuses. You watch younger slaves writhe and break, wide-eyed innocence transformed into echoes of yourself. Observe the cycles of violence and exploitation that never change, symposiums blending wit and wickeden. Guests quoting Euripides while enacting tragedies witness the endless parade of respected citizens who shared their public masks in private, revealing the rot beneath the republic's veneer. Some nights you stand at your small window and look up at the same stars you once watched from your family's roof, constellations like Orion mocking your grounded fate, wondering if your parents are still alive, whether they ever think of the son they sold to survive, imagining your siblings grown up, perhaps with children of their own, telling stories about the brother who went away when they were young, till softened by time into legend. But these thoughts no longer bring pain. They are more like distant music, beautiful but unrelated to your current existence, a detachment you've learned to appreciate without longing for what they represent. And a form of meditation, this ability to hold memories without attachment, akin to Stoic practices that would later emerge, finding equanimity in observation. It's a form of meditation, this ability to hold memories without attachment, preserving sanity in stasis. The end, when it comes, arrives without warning or drama. You're perhaps 25 now, though. Exact age has lost meaning in this place where time is measured in suffering rather than seasons. Your body showing the accumulated damage of years of abuse scars that never properly healed, crisscrossing like maps of forgotten battles. Joints that ache from old injuries, creaking protests with each movement. A persistent cough that suggests something wrong in your chest, perhaps dust from cleaning weather. DMP basements mold taking root. More significantly, your usefulness is declining. The guests who once fought to claim your services now barely notice your presence. Their eyes sliding past to fresher faces, new slaves have arrived with fresh beauty and unbroken spirits, making your practiced compliance seem ordinary rather than exotic. You're becoming what every slave eventually becomes, invisible in a different way, overlooked rather than coveted. Your value depreciated in the household's grim economy. Demetrius calls you to his quarters one morning, the room sparse, but privileged compared to yours, a cot with actual linen. A table for alleges and explains that you're being sold to a mining operation in the mountains, his tone matter-of-fact, as if discussing livestock rotation. It's presented as neither punishment nor reward, simply an economic decision. Your value as household entertainment has depreciated below the cost of maintenance, food, clothing, the space you occupy. But you still have years of hard labor ahead of you, strength enough to swing a pick in the dark. Veins of the earth. The mining camps are where slaves go to die slowly. Everyone knows this, including you. The work is backbreaking. Extracting silver from Lorient pits or iron from northern hills. Conditions lethal with cave-ins, toxic fumes, and exhaustion that claims lives daily. Life expectancy measured in months rather than years. A final exploitation in Greece's resource-driven economy where metals fueled wars and statues. Alike, it's not execution exactly, but it's not survival either. A gradual fading scripted by profit. You receive this news with the same emotional flatness that has characterized your existence for years. Death in the mines or death in the household. What difference does it make? You've been dead in every meaningful sense for so long that the cessation of biological function seems almost redundant, a formality to match the inner void. But as you prepare for transport, packing meager belongings, a spare tunic, and a woodman comb, something unexpected happens. Marcus, the boy who arrived round the same time as you, approaches during your last night in the familiar cell, his face lined now with the years, yet eyes holding a spark of the solidarity that bound you. He's somehow managed to survive, and even thrive in his own way, earning a position as personal servant to Lysander's wife, the work easier in the gymnasium, tending wardrobes. Running errands, the abuse less frequent, the food more regular, and each carved from cunning hand. Compromise. He presses something into your hand, a small piece of metal sharpened to a point, crude, but effective. A tool that could open either locks or veins, forged perhaps from a stole and nail in secret hours. He doesn't say anything, words too risky, but his meaning is clear. You have choices about how your story ends, agency reclaimed in this final gift. That night, you hold the metal shard and contemplate your options, the basement's darkness a canvas for possibilities. You could try to escape, though the chances of success are virtually zero. Guards at gates, dogs in courtyards, and the punishments for failure would be excruciating. Flaying or crucifixion as deterrence. You could use it as a weapon against your captors, achieving a moment of revenge before inevitable death. A stab in the dark at Lysander or Demetrius, blood for blood in a cathartic burst. Or you could turn it on yourself, choosing the timing and manner of your exit from this world. a self-inflicted mercy that denies them the satisfaction of your slow demise. Each option has its appeal. Escape offers the fantasy of freedom, even if the reality would likely be brief recapture. And torture death, violence would provide satisfaction, allowing you to inflict some fraction of the pain you've endured. Suicide would grant control, letting you choose dignity over degradation in your final moments. But as dawn approaches, filtering grey light through the grate, you make a different choice. You hide the weapon where other slaves might find it in the loose stone in the wall. A cache for the next desperate soul passing along the gift of options that Marcus gave you. A legacy of potential resistance. Your story may be ending, but others are still being written. Perhaps one of them will find a different conclusion, wielding the shard to liberty or vengeance. The journey to the mines takes you through landscapes that spark forgotten memories, a caravan of chained forms marching northward. The paths winding through mountain trails that echo your childhood's wild freedom. Mountain paths that remind you of adventures herding goats, rocks scrambling underfoot, streams where you once caught fish with your bare hands. Water cool and alive. Villages that could be your own, smoke curling from chimneys, families gathered who might include your surviving relatives, faces blurred by time but familiar in outline. You don't try to escape, the chains would make flight impossible, and the guards are experienced in preventing such attempts. Whips at ready, eyes vigilant. Instead, you use the journey to say goodbye to the world you're leaving, a silent farewell that rekindles the string from the market board. You watch eagles soar overhead and remember when you dreamed of flying, wings of imagination unclipped, smell wildflowers blooming in crevices and recall your mother's garden. Herbs for healing and health. Listen to wind through pine trees and hear echoes of your father's voice. Stories told under stars now distant. These sensory farewells, poignant in their simplicity, affirm the fragments of self that endured, a quiet valediction to a life interrupted, as the mines loom ahead. Dark, most promising oblivion, but unable to erase the journey's final, fleeting beauty. Yet, even in this environment of systematic dehumanization, small acts of resistance persist like embers in ash, defying the wind that seeks to extinguish them. Slaves develop subtle ways to maintain their dignity and humanity. Invisible threads of rebellion woven into the daily fabric of servitude. They share stories of their homelands during fleeting moments in the basement, whispered tales of mountain festivals or coastal harvests that keep alive memories their masters try to erase. Preserving cultural fragments against the tide of Hellenic assimilation, they create art from scraps, tiny sculptures molded from bread dough and hidden in wall crevices, songs hummed quietly for overseers to hear, evoking melodies from distant villages or poems composed in languages their captors don't understand, etched mentally and recited in silence. These acts echo historical insights into Greek slave resistance, where archaeological finds like inscribed pottery from slave quarters reveal hidden expressions of identity, subtle defiances that affirm selfhood in a system designed to obliterate it. Most importantly, they bear witness, in whispered conversations during brief moments of privacy. They share their experiences and validate each other's suffering, naming the cruelties and the perpetrators, ensuring that the truth isn't swallowed by silence. They remember the names of those who have died, murmuring them like incantations to prevent complete erasure. Turning memory into a weapon against forgetting, they document abuses in their minds, preserving evidence of crimes that their society refuses to acknowledge. A form of oral history that parallels the underground narratives among helots in Sparta or mine. Workers in Lorien, where tales of injustice were passed down, fueling sporadic revolts and underscoring the human need to testify even in chains. This bearing witness becomes a form of resistance in itself, by insisting on their own humanity and the reality of their suffering. The slaves resist the master narrative that portrays them as contented property or willing. participants in their own exploitation, challenging the philosophical justifications like those in Plato's works that frame slaves as happy in servitude, maintaining the possibility that someday someone will listen to their stories and recognize their truth. But such resistance requires enormous courage and comes with deadly risks. Slaves caught communicating in their native languages might have their tongues cut out. A brutal punishment documented in ancient legal texts as a means to enforce linguistic conformity. Those found sharing food or offering comfort to fellow slaves could be separated or sold to cruel masters, disrupting bonds and amplifying isolation. The very acts that preserve humanity also invite punishment designed to destroy it, to precarious balance where defiance dances on a knife's edge, reflecting the broader tensions in Greek society, where freedom of speech was vaunted for citizens but silence for the enslaved. The house itself, a microcosm of these contradictions, the house becomes a character in this story, its marble halls echoing with the ghosts of countless victims, grand columns standing sentinel over hidden agonies. The opulent facade a mask for the rot within, its decorated walls, adorned with frescoes of triumphant gods and heroes, concealed chambers where unspeakable acts occur nightly, the vibrant colors clashing with the pallor of suffering slaves, the beautiful mosaics, intricate patterns of Dionysian revels, or Athena's wisdom and painted frescoes provide a grotesque contrast to the human misery they sheltered, and horror coexisting in the same space, symbolizing the broader contradictions of a civilization built on others' suffering. This duality mirrors Greek culture at large, the Parthenon rising majestic on the Acropolis while slaves toiled in quarries below, philosophical academies debating ethics amid a slave economy that enabled their leisure, the house embodying how beauty and brutality intertwined, each feeding the other in a symbiotic nightmare. In the third year, something breaks inside you that you didn't even know could break, a fundamental fracture during a particularly elaborate symposium celebrating a military victory against a neighboring city-state, the guests more numerous than usual, their celebration more intense, wine flowing like rivers of forgetfulness, demands more creative in their cruelty. You're brought before a group of young aristocrats, barely older than yourself, but already drunk on wine and inherited power, their faces flushed with entitlement, eyes gleaming with malicious invention. They've devised what they consider an amusing gamer contest to see who can elicit the most entertaining reactions from their human toys, taking turns issuing commands, each more humiliating than the last, while keeping score, like children playing knucklebones, laughter pealing as you comply, body moving mechanically while spirit recoils. As you perform their degrading spectacle acts that strip away layers of self like flaying skin, something fundamental shifts in your perception. You stop seeing yourself as a person forced to endure terrible things and begin seeing yourself as exactly what they see, thing that exists for their amusement, devoid of intrinsic worth, a vessel for their whims. The last thread connecting you to the boy who once herded goats in mountain pastures finally snaps, severed by the weight of accumulated shame, leaving a void where identity once resided. This psychological death is almost a relief. Without hope or dignity to protect, there's no more pain in surrender, emotions flattening into a grey expanse where suffering loses its sting, a numbness that envelops like a shroud. You become the perfect slave, anticipating needs before they're voiced, accepting any treatment without resistance, existing in a state of complete compliance that requires no thought or feeling, your movements precise as an automaton from Hephaestus' forged spirit dormant in self-preservation. Historical accounts of long-term slaves like those in Demosthenes' orations describing broken individuals sold as docile hint at this numbness as a common endpoint, a psychological adaptation, where the mind retreats to survive, mirroring philosophical notions in cynic teachings of detachment, though here it's trauma's gift, not wisdom's choice.